Hi everyone, welcome to this week's nutrition video. Today I'm going to be talking about food cravings and more specifically sugar cravings. I'm going to be addressing why we experience sugar cravings and then also providing some tips of what you can do to curb these cravings, because they can become quite overwhelming for some people, and then we give in to those urges and then we find out that it blows out our diet completely, and then we form a sense of guilt, and it's essentially a downward spiral from there. So firstly, let's look at the main reasons why we experience sugar cravings. It's important to note that everyone, and just about everyone, experiences them, and we get them, whether it be on a daily basis, whether it be periodically, but they're really hard to predict and they're even more complex to understand. But if we look at the research over the years, it's shed a light on everything that may contribute to sugar cravings, such as genetics, to emotions, to the environment. All these things can play a role in determining what foods we like, and also foods that we can feel compelled to devour. Now, many researchers conclude that sugar is addictive due to the release of hormone dopamine after the consumption of food or sugar. And in certain individuals with a predisposition to addiction, this causes the reward-seeking behavior similar to that of any drug use. And dramatic falls in blood sugar, which definitely occur after eating refined carbohydrates, such as lollies, sweets, biscuits. These are all will affect the part of the brain that controls impulse. Now, as a result, this leads to a loss of self-control and a subsequent craving for more unhealthy, high-caloric-based foods. However, there are not the things I've just mentioned are not the only reason why our body craves sugar. There are many other reasons, and I want to break that down because it's really important to understand. Once we have a better understanding as to what might trigger or cause these sugar cravings, then we know what we can investigate and potentially treat, or things that we should take notice of. So, the things that will cause sugar cravings is firstly DNA, or our genetics. Individual food preferences have a lot to do with a person's upbringing. Chances are, if you're exposed to something as a young child, you'll be less averse to it as an adult. Research has definitely shown that people's preference for food, like coffee, artichokes, bacon, even dark chocolate, blue cheese, and even broccoli, are linked to variations in specific genes. And this is really interesting because when you get down to the base of it and find that the majority of these people who enjoyed a certain food or shared something in common with a particular gene, then we can start looking at DNA fragmentation. Stress is definitely something that triggers sugar cravings. We tend to crave more sugary-based foods and even salty-based foods when we're either anxious, overworked, run down, or stressed. And an explanation for this is because our taste buds are primed to appreciate them more during these states. The taste cells on the tongue, what we call our taste buds, these contain receptors for hormones called glucocorticoids. And these are activated during periods of stress. Now, the highest concentrations of these glucocorticoids is in the taste cells for sweet, umami, and bitter tastes. And this suggests that we may actually perceive these differently and appreciate them more during periods of stress. Another thing that will impact on our cravings are things like sight, sound, and smell. It's well known that the colour and appearance of foods can really affect our taste appreciation. Furthermore, environmental sights and sounds are also believed to influence our cravings. Locations such as grocery stores, restaurants, retail stores, or even your own home could also play a role in what you crave. I talked earlier about hormones and how they can also play a role in cravings, and this is absolutely true. So specific hormones definitely have their place in triggering these cravings. So firstly, let's look at a hormone called leptin. I've talked about leptin before, but leptin is essentially a hormone produced in our fat tissue. Its primary role is to stimulate your appetite. Now, regulation of this hormone is normal when your stomach and your brain are in sync, but the problem starts when constant surges of leptin trick your brain into feeling hungry, and even when you're not. So the major cause of having too much body fat or carrying more fat means that leptin is going to be produced in higher quantities. And there is a condition called leptin resistance where your body isn't metabolizing or utilizing leptin efficiently, so it remains high, which then triggers our body or brain to feel hungry consistently. Low levels of serotonin, so another hormone or another neurotransmitter, which is also known as our happy hormone, it's our feel-good hormone. And this particular neurotransmitter is produced primarily in the gut and is directly linked to our mood, appetite, and also our digestion. Eating carbohydrates and sugar increases the release of serotonin, making us feel really happy and really comforted. And this feeling is temporary. So when your levels of serotonin are low, our brain tells us that a sugary or carbohydrate-based snack or food will basically fix the problem. For females, as your body's estrogen levels fall in weeks 3 and 4 of your menstrual cycle, levels of serotonin also fall, while cortisol, which is our stress hormone, increases. Now, this may leave you feeling irritable, mood swings, and also heightened PMS-related symptoms. It can also elevate your hunger. So this is why women might experience food cravings during their menstrual cycle. So the question then we ask ourselves, what happens if we give in to those cravings and consume large amounts of sugar? Well, it really firstly depends on the type of sugar that you're consuming, as some are processed and then some are naturally occurring. And these act differently in the body, in how your body digests them and then also utilizes them, affecting other bodily processes. So let's firstly look at glucose. We know that glucose is one of the predominant sources of sugar that is naturally found in foods. Now, when it's consumed, there is a corresponding rise and subsequent fall in blood glucose or blood sugar levels. As glucose is absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract into the bloodstream, it's then taken into the cells, distributed to the body, specifically to the muscles where it is needed. So that's why glucose is very important when we are exercising, predominantly in prolonged exercise or endurance-related exercise. The glucose in the blood stimulates the pancreas to release the hormone insulin. which is then triggers the uptake of glucose by cells in the body, causing our blood sugar or blood glucose to return back to normal. So people who struggle with insulin, in terms of if their blood sugar levels are constantly high, they're going to have a problem with consistent production of insulin. Now, if that occurs and the body isn't utilizing insulin efficiently, we then have the risk of a condition called insulin resistance. And this is problematic for people who are trying to lose fat because it's a storage hormone, and therefore it's going to cause you to hold on to fat mass, or worst case scenario, gain further fat mass. So it really depends on the type of sugars. That was glucose. In terms of fructose, the metabolism of fructose is slightly different. It is also taken up into the bloodstream from the gut, but in this case, the liver serves as a pre-processing organ, if you will, which converts fructose into glucose or fat, depending on how active you are and if your body is going to utilize it. The liver can release the glucose and fat into the blood or store it as glycogen or fat deposits, which if the sugars are consumed in excess, it may lead to fatty liver disease and increased risk of type 2 diabetes and also cardiovascular disease as well. So it really depends on the types of sugars and how they respond in the body as well. So that is very important when I'm assessing someone's diet. I'm looking at all the different types of sugars that they are consuming. So the question you're probably asking, well, okay, I'm experiencing these cravings, but is it actually possible to beat these cravings? Well, there are some strategies that you might want to be worth implementing into your day-to-day activities that will help you combat these sugar cravings. Firstly, consuming foods that are high in magnesium, chromium, and zinc can be very beneficial. These nutrients help improve your cell's sensitivity to insulin to maximize the amount of sugar your body is able to metabolize as well as burn. And a deficiency in those nutrients can definitely lead to sugar cravings. So if it's really noticeable, I might sometimes supplement with these nutrients, and then we find a reduction in cravings. You might think about adding some spice to your meals, things like cinnamon, cardamom, nutmeg. These have all been clinically shown to improve blood sugar control, especially in people who have poorly controlled diabetes. So therefore, it can really help with that glucose response. Healthy fats, really important. Including healthy fats or increasing healthy fats to your meals. Things like avocados, nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil, salmon. These all help provide a satiety effect to the body, so a level of fullness, and they also help your body control stabilize blood sugars. We all know that fat is more slowly metabolized and broken down and digested in the body compared to carbohydrates. So adding healthy fats in the diet can be really beneficial. Stress management, really, really important. We all know, and I just mentioned, through stress, your elevated levels of cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, these are all things that are going to stimulate a craving and a sugar craving response. And that's purely through what we call the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So that communication between the brain and the adrenal glands is going to stimulate some form of craving. So stress management is very, very important to help with that. Something else that can help improve cravings or combat the cravings is remove any temptation. This sounds like a really easy tip, but a major reason why people flock to sugary foods in the first place, it's because it's right there in front of them, or it's in the pantry at home, or it's in the refrigerator, or it's on their office desk. So by removing this temptation, it goes towards that saying, out of sight, out of mind. So that's a simple tip. Some things that you might consider if you really do have a sugar craving and you just want a little fix, some things that can help there is maybe using stevia instead. Stevia is a natural sweetener and it's a sugar substitute. It's extracted from the leaves of the plant species stevia, and that can be really helpful as it's a natural sweetener rather than an artificial sweetener. It also contains no calories and it is 200 times sweeter than sugar, so sucrose. You might bake foods, and you might bake with overripe bananas or mashed overripe bananas instead of using sugar. You might also use applesauce, or you might use really good quality medjool dates and turn that into a puree and use that as a natural sweetener as well. And then further from that, you might use medjool dates as an actual snack themselves. Really high in natural fibers and also contain those natural sugars. So that can be also very beneficial as well. You might consider infusing a jug or a water bottle with pieces of sweet fruit. So this can really help infuse that water and then maybe curb some of those cravings as well. One final question I get is, are there ways to prevent sugar cravings from occurring in the first place? As much as we would love them not to be there because it causes temptations, there are some things that you can do to assist with that. But if it's a hormonal imbalance, if you're stressed, these are all things that might be challenging to stop the cravings. However, the things that you can think about doing is make sure you have a varied and balanced diet first and foremost, because you are then at reduced risk of any form of nutrient deficiencies, like those nutrients earlier I mentioned that can really assist with blood sugar monitoring and stabilization. And therefore those deficiencies might trigger the cravings in the first place. Get plenty of sleep. I cannot tell you how important this is. When you're tired, your energy levels are lowered. You're going to be more tempted to having some sugary foods to give you a pick-me-up and a burst of energy. And also, poor sleep hygiene is also going to trigger an imbalance of hormones as well, particularly an elevation in cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And we know that when that's elevated, we are more likely to have some cravings. So sleep is paramount as well. Another tip is don't starve yourself unnecessarily. So going long periods of time without food may cause your blood sugar levels to drop. And therefore, this is going to promote hunger, and you're more likely to crave the carbohydrates and sugary foods because your blood sugar levels are low as well. Now, I'm not talking about intermittent fasting, which can be very beneficial as a protocol, but your body does have to go through a point of adaptation. So in the initial periods, you might feel hungry, especially during times of stress. If you're trying to do some fasting, that might trigger more cravings as well. So the other tip I might provide is crowd it out. So make sure your meals are filled with vegetables, lean protein, healthy fats, as these then it's therefore little room for much else to consume. And these foods, particularly your proteins, your fats, they're not going to cause high spikes in your blood sugar levels and therefore trigger a sugar or craving response. So I've provided a lot of tips in this video. There are reasons as to why these food cravings occur in the first place. If it's a more physiological response, it might be worth investigating in terms of a hormone imbalance and deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies. So someone like a practitioner like myself can help you navigate through that. But if it's just some general cravings, try implementing some of the tips I've talked about today.